On this week's episode, we're going to obviously talk in detail about that incident and try and work out what on earth went down there, who could and couldn't be to blame, and what it means for racing standards going forward. Let's take a look. Welcome to another episode of Back of the Grid. I'm your host this week, Tom, and I am joined by Chris.
Hi, everyone.
So, in a sprint weekend, we normally have so much to talk about. Just because there's quite a lot of action and a lot of stuff that goes on. But I think on this one, there is basically no other way to start it or go into it than talk about Verstappen Norris. I think we will definitely touch on other topics from the race and the weekend in general.
For sure.
But I think rather than do the clickbaity thing of suggest we're going to talk about nonsense for 20 minutes and then eventually get to this, we might as well just get to this, hadn't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to do? Do you want to go through it like play by play?
I think so.
Okay.
Because there's lots of layers to this and lots of constituent parts, and I think we need to give them all a bit of oxygen. So,
do you want to run through the full kind of timeline, then discuss, or do you want to discuss things as we get to them in the timeline?
Let's just do things as we get to them, because otherwise we're just going to forget stuff.
Okay. This could get interesting.
Yeah, I guess let's do some like build up and context first of all, because for half the race, it very much looked like business as usual for Verstappen. Like the opening stint on mediums, he pulled a 6-second lead. Then second stint on hards, I think at the peak it was just over 8-second lead he'd got. Everything looking great. The difference was, and where I think McLaren really outdid Red Bull this weekend, is that they had saved a set of new mediums for Norris, whereas Verstappen only had new hard tyres and used mediums. Which is why at the end of Verstappen's second stint, we saw him like really struggling for pace. Like we were watching him leading the race, not being able to pull away from the two lapped Haas cars, which was such a weird thing to be watching. He was like, the two Haas guys were like, what do we do? Like, we've been lapped and he's just not going anywhere. Like, he's still right in front of us. Like, the team was saying they were leaving him out to avoid him coming out back into traffic, which is probably true. But I also think a big part of him staying out when he was complaining about the tyres was, we need this last stint to be as short as possible because we know we're going to be at a tyre disadvantage.
Yeah, definitely.
Then for insult to injury, a extremely rare slow pit stop for Red Bull. I don't remember the last time I saw Red Bull botch a stop quite that badly.
Right, rear was pretty slow, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then as a result, they had to hold him slightly because Norris was coming in. So yeah, all of which suddenly brought them very close together on the track. And as we've kind of got used to seeing this season, at least in the kind of last 4 or 5 races, the McLaren, Norris in particular, seems to finish races extremely strongly, especially compared to the Red Bull. Like I don't know if it's a tyre wear thing or a low fuel thing, maybe a combination of the two, but the McLaren pace in the closing stage of races has been like night and day compared to the rest of the grid in recent races.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, like the tyre advantage obviously helps in this specific scenario, but they've put themselves in that essentially by being able to look after the tyres better all weekend, generally speaking, and have it. I mean, could quite likely be a slightly different allocation, I guess, a slightly different set of choices, but even still, like, they've put themselves in that position. So there's, even if you want to say, oh well, it was just because of a tyre advantage, it's not as simple as that in the grand scheme of things, is it? Because you've got to get yourself into the position where you've got, like, what was the situation? Max had new hards, which would have obviously seen him be slower, but at least had fresh rubber, or used mediums.
Yeah.
So it was one or the other, wasn't it? There was a disadvantage either way, and McLaren and Norris have found themselves in that scenario. So, they've got the right to have that advantage in realistic
and the
terms.
hard tyres were pretty terrible all weekend, so it was the decision was kind of they were pretty forced. Like if they got out on hards, he'd have been done.
Yeah.
Used mediums, gave him a chance. Anyway, and then for good measure, Verstappen had that lock up on the outlap as well, which I mean, he was so close to dropping it into the gravel when he had that big lock up. But
Yeah.
Right, all of which brings us on to lap 55, which was the first time Norris made an attempt at passing him. And the first accusation of Verstappen moving under braking. I don't know how well you remember these individual incidents, Tom. I've kind of broken them up.
I mean,
bit by bit.
luckily for you, I did what I could to like reminisce, let's say, and remind myself of them before recording. So I'll have some insight for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, Norris sort of started to jink towards the inside, and Max sort of quite reactively, I think, kind of covered, and then Norris went back to the outside again. I think that's borderline for me. He definitely looked like a reactive move.
I mean, it's a move under braking for me, this one.
Yeah.
I think if you watch the onboards, especially the onboard rear facing from Verstappen back to Norris, you can see the moment where Norris goes to make his move. So he's essentially, Verstappen's committed to the racing line, the outside of the corner, essentially the outside entry point. He hits what is the braking zone for the corner, and when Norris says, okay, well, I'm going to make a move out of this and move towards the inside, Verstappen very clearly moves, which then forces Norris to have to take some kind of avoiding action, which is either lift or adjust, which is what he does.
Yeah.
So I think that is a move under braking. Regardless of whatever we think about the other stuff, that was a move under braking.
Yeah, I think at the very least that deserved a warning, I think.
Yeah.
You can't keep doing that.
And to be brutally honest with you, this one thing is probably the catalyst for the next 9 laps.
Absolutely.
That one moment is the kind of starting factor, because we'll get into it as I go on, but the moment that is let go without even a word being said, as far as I can see, that sets a precedent, which is then in turn what leads to everything that goes on in the next 9
I'd
laps.
agree with that.
So we'll keep going.
Yes, a few laps ahead, lap 59, and that was where the first time Norris slung it up the inside, which, going back to what you're just saying, it very much felt like if you're going to move into the middle of the track when I try and pass you on the inside, I'm going to sling it all the way up the inside. So even if you move under braking, I'm really going there. As it was a bit too much of a lunge from Norris. He locked up a bit, ran wide, and gave the position back to Verstappen. Honestly, all fine on that one, I think. Norris went for a big lunge. It didn't pay off. He got ahead by virtue of going off track. Gave the place back.
Yeah. I think that's all fair. He left it too late, a little bit too late, locked up because of it, went wide, gave the place back once he was back on circuit, and I don't think there's anything more to be said with that one. Like, it wouldn't have been a fair, legitimate overtake if he'd have tried to make it stick and tried to argue against it, but he gave it back. So, and he gave it back like instantly. The only reason he stayed ahead was just to essentially get his momentum down the straight and get back on circuit, and then he immediately gave the place back. So I don't think there's anything untoward there.
No, I do think in the interests of fairly criticising everyone that needs criticising, I think given that Norris was on a track limits warning already at that point, I think doing that big a lunge, probably not the best choice he could have made. He got a 5-second penalty as a result of that. Because he would have been informed at that point that, if I think we even heard him get informed that you have a black and white flag with track limits at turn 3, isn't it, technically?
Yeah, turn 3, that one. Officially.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of... See, this is the bit of my memory that is fuzzy, because I haven't gone back and watched enough of 56, 57, 58 to properly observe how aggressive under braking and on the straight going into that corner Verstappen was. But the moment that the move under braking on 55 has gone unpunished, or at least unacknowledged, let's call it the frustration is building within Norris, and that's where that move comes from. Because he's seeing these, let's call them like micro moves. Like, they're not huge moves under braking, they're not, but they are late and they are, potentially dangerous when a car's very close behind you. And he's becoming frustrated by that and ultimately slinging it up the inside. And in the interest of being fair on everyone, Verstappen wants warning at minimum for what he was doing on lap 55, but he's also slightly got a point when him and GP are discussing lap 59 and they're saying, don't know why they're saying you've forced him off track here, mate. Like, he's thrown that up the inside and done it himself. Like, completely. And Verstappen and GP are well within their rights on that regard. Like, in the interest of being fair to both parties, there's bits and pieces of it where they're both kind of doing things they shouldn't be doing. And we'll get to my overall summary of it, I think, in a minute. But like, this is what ultimately again causes it to build up to where it does.
Yeah, all Max really did there was give Norris enough space to run off track, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like, after it's almost like after that first attempt, Norris in his head was like, "Oh, this is how we're doing this, are we?" And he went into, "We're fighting this really aggressively" mode, and maybe didn't give the track limits consideration. And picks up a 5-7 penalty for that. Didn't actually find out about that penalty for several more laps, but there we go.
Yeah.
Lap 63, another few laps later, Norris, another big old dive down the inside. This time he keeps it within track limits, but Verstappen is the one that runs off track this time and keeps the position by running wide off track. Norris says he went off track to keep a position, he should give it to me. Verstappen says he was forced off the track. Now, we can discuss the relative merits of whether that is how overtakes should be done or not, and whether those positions should be given back or not. One thing that really sticks in my craw is when Verstappen complains about people overtaking him like this, because he has built a career on overtaking people by slinging it up the inside and giving them no room. So every time he complains about that, it's like, come on, man.
So, incident-wise, I think it's fair as it was, because I don't think Norris gave Verstappen any room to turn in the first place. Now, whether Verstappen should be keeping his foot in on the outside of the circuit to keep the position instead of arguing the case and saying it should be given back and letting it be investigated is a little bit different, but there's a lot that goes into the definition of the overtaking rules, and one of the key things in it at the minute is that, yes, you don't have to be even ahead of the car going into the corner if you're on the inside. Lando doesn't even have to be ahead of Verstappen at the apex. He just has to be, what is it? I think alongside the wing mirror is the official kind of definition at the minute. Front axle to wing mirror is roughly where they're talking about at the minute.
The guidance for this season is have their front axle at least alongside the mirror if it's an overtake on the inside. No, so later than the apex.
He doesn't have to be fully in front of him, so he's fine there. But the other bit of that is that the car on the outside should always be given enough room to stay on the track all the way to the exit of the corner, which is not given. So I think that the way that this one plays out kind of sorts itself out. Whether that's how it should be sorted out is another matter. But I would say I'm kind of with Verstappen on this one, because he doesn't have room to make the exit of the corner while staying on track. I think if you look at this and compare it to the way that they were racing in the sprint race, that is a much fairer and a much more legitimate exchange of the same move. Because there's the moment where Max Verstappen is starting to turn in and realizes he can't, but he's given enough room and enough space to kind of be able to make that adjustment. And I think that's what's different here is Lando is essentially dead stopped in front of him, like across the corner, and not struggling to make it, because he does make it, but he's having to put everything into what he can to get that car stopped. And I think it's one of those where if it had gone down ever so slightly differently and Max had slightly more room to do similar to what he did in the sprint, he would not have run wide, for one, and two, probably would have looked at it in the same vein as the sprint one, like, this is a good battle. Whereas I think there's something to be said for Verstappen feeling that he's got to go around there to try and essentially make the corner. He's got to go around the outside.
Yeah, the only way Verstappen could have stayed within track limits would have been to almost stop and and
that's the difference between when you compare the sprint move and the Grand Prix move in that regard. That's the difference there for me.
And it's just, I think this is just something that's just a bit broken about F1 overtaking rules, and has been for years. Like if you read because the stewards have new guidelines this season about how to judge these things, but all of the guidance is around how much room the overtaking car is or isn't entitled to. But there's nothing there about if you are being overtaken, how much room you should get as the defending car. And I think, and again, it's like I say, this Lando put the same move on Max that Max has been doing to anyone and everyone for years, which is take the corner at a speed where you will just stay within track limits, but you leave the other car no choice but to run off the road.
Here's the interesting thing, though. If I think back to Las Vegas last year and Max doing something similar to that on Leclerc into turn one, he got penalised for that, correct?
I think he did, yeah.
Or did he give the place back and maybe avoid a penalty? It was one or the other. No, he did.
I think he got penalised for it.
And I'm not saying this is the same thing, but it's very close to being the same thing, because Norris is committing to something that doesn't allow the other driver to take their opportunity. But again, it goes unchecked. And again, the rules of engagement were officially off the moment that the move under braking just got let slide. Yeah. And the fact that this kept going on and on and on, lap after lap after lap, going unchecked on both of them at this point, I've got things where I'm pro Verstappen and things where I'm pro Norris in this, as you can tell from what I'm saying. But because it keeps going unchecked and the exciting race gets to continue, we end up in a scenario where we get to it the next lap and all hell breaks loose. And I would just like to point out, by the way, as well, Verstappen did a similar thing to Norris against Leclerc in 2019, and again, it all went unpunished.
Yeah, that was how he took the lead for the win,
I think. Yeah. Now, in that scenario, I would say Leclerc found it easier to make the corner, but he still had to leave the circuit, and he was still kind of wheel banged and bumped by Verstappen. But because nothing happens there and nothing happens here, things like this suddenly become acceptable driving standards. Like, Norris has not been spoken to about what's happened here. Verstappen wasn't spoken to about what happened with Leclerc at the time. Ocon and Gasly in this very race, did they get a penalty? Did Ocon get any kind of penalty for pushing Gasly off?
No, I think
so. So suddenly that corner has essentially been extended by the width of the curb into that runoff, because they're letting drivers engage with each other in wheel-to-wheel combat and letting that be an acceptable outcome.
Yeah.
And at that point, McLaren, unfortunately, have got no argument to he kept his position by staying off the track, because the FIA and the stewards have set a precedent over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years that running wide in that corner and maintaining your position is acceptable. or pushing a driver off that way to get drive out the corner is acceptable.
Yeah, I
there's the
equally
problem.
think if Norris had made that move stick, I also don't think that would have gone penalised because,
No.
like you say, the press has been set. And I think it's wrong all round. Like, I don't think you should be able to drive off track to maintain a position if someone's trying to overtake you. But I also don't think you should be overtaking people by running them off the road. And both things were true in this case. So, yeah, bad all round in that case.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that brings us to lap 64, where Norris went to the outside again. Verstappen moved over. I think it's fair to say, as a statement of facts, that Verstappen moved over in the braking zone. They made contact. Both got punctures. Put Norris out of the race. Verstappen recovered but got a 10-second penalty for it. On the punctures, it was almost like a perfect storm. Like, we've seen cars make much more contact than that before and go fine, but it kind of looked like it was like the edges of the wheel rims that touched each other, and that's what just kind of pinged the tyres off.
Pinged each tyre off. Now, so I've got something interesting to say and point out, I guess, about this, which many other people on the internet have probably already seen anyway. But what Verstappen does to Norris here is yet another incident of something that's happened multiple times in that same corner over multiple years, probably even happened multiple times in this race and just wasn't broadcast. And because nothing ever gets said about it or done about it, I'm not saying that what's happened has been blown out of proportion, but again, a precedent has been set. So, two very prime examples, if anyone wants to go look at them, is Carlos Sainz doing exactly the same thing to Max Verstappen in 2023. So last year, Carlos essentially squeezes Verstappen roughly about the same amount that Verstappen squeezes Norris. Verstappen's even a similar amount of distance back because if Verstappen had made contact, it probably would have been front wheel to... Oh, no, sorry. He's a little bit further back, I apologise, because it would have been front wheel to side pod rather than rear wheel to rear wheel. He wasn't quite as far alongside, but he was still... His nose was still there, and there was still an element of squeezing the guy out, and Verstappen had to back out of it. But ironically, Verstappen got better traction, if I remember right. I can't remember, because I only watched the corner incident.
Yeah.
I didn't watch but I think it did actually end up giving him a better run anyway into turn 4, and he eventually got the move done. But then another couple of incidents of the same thing. Now, they're similar, but they're not the same. And the reason I say that is because this is the squeeze being done by the overtaking driver, not the defending driver. But Vettel versus Hamilton and Vettel versus Norris, both when he was at Ferrari, so 2018 and 2019, I want to say, respectively. Those two moves are essentially Vettel coming from behind in that scenario using the DRS. So, like I say, it is very different because it's not an attack. It's an attack, not a defence. But he's getting alongside them and essentially doing the same thing of going, I'm going to push you as far as I possibly can towards that curb, definitely not leaving a full car's width, and then making the corner. But in all three of those scenarios, the the other driver, the driver on the outside, has had to essentially take to the curb to avoid contact.
Yeah.
And somewhat leave the circuit and not being given a full car's width. And that's just three very quick examples that I could find from just looking at random... This, bearing in mind, is stuff that's in race highlights. So I'm looking at 6-7 minute videos or whatever they are. They're condensed down to like the interesting bits. And I found three almost not identical, but very similar things straight away. There'll be countless others. And again, because it goes unchecked and it's left alone, because there's no contact, it leads to this where Verstappen's doing essentially the same thing that half that grid's done at some point over the last 4 or 5 years. And Norris has been a little bit more bullish than most people and decided to stick with it, knowing that if there's contact, Max is likely going to get a penalty.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is the penalties only come on the outcome of the thing. So Max has got a penalty because there's been contact. But in all these other years, when someone else has squeezed somebody out of that track, if the rule is you should leave somebody a car's width on the outside and you're not doing it, you should get minimum warned, like a black and white flag for it or something. Worst case, you should get like a 5-second penalty. And for years, this has been left unchecked to the point where Verstappen didn't particularly move under braking because he chose his braking point and he braked and like kind of stayed in a straight line, essentially. He didn't weave or anything like that. He just braked in the same way that so many other drivers have done in that same situation. And because of this heated exchange that's been going on for nearly 10 laps at this point, Lando's decided to keep in it this time because he sees it as the only opportunity to get past him because all the other stuff's gone unchecked. This particular move we're talking about has gone unchecked for years, and it leads to what is essentially, could any other scenario have been quite harmless wheel-to-wheel banging and both of them continued, but like you said before, is like the contact is that like kind of almost perfect storm contact that's caused essentially like de-rimmed the tyres on both cars pretty much.
I think, God, there's like so many layers to this. Like, where do we begin? Like, I think as a headline, we can agree that Max, it was completely right that Max was penalised for this.
Agreed.
Ultimately,
at no point am I saying he shouldn't be penalised. For the context of anyone that's listened to that rant, at no point am I saying Max shouldn't have been penalised. But what I am saying is that the lack of warnings and following the rules in that exact same corner for years leading up to this, and essentially poor stewarding throughout that race and races before, enables the likes of Max Verstappen to attempt to do things like that. It enables them all to do it. It enables them all.
And I think another layer to this is that, again, in all those examples you've mentioned, and there's plenty of, you can go and see them very easily, as you said, examples of people doing a similar thing, squeezing across in the braking zone. And in all those examples, as you say, the driver on the outside has moved across onto the curb. Now, in this scenario, Lando could have also moved across onto the curb. He chose to stay along the white line. Now,
the difference is he's entitled to do that, though.
He
shouldn't have to move, and
this is
where the line blurs between my stance on it all, I guess.
Yeah, he absolutely has the right to stay along the white line. The space he should be given is a car's width from the white line. He's completely within his rights to stay there. He shouldn't have to move across. However, if he had moved over, he'd have lived to fight another day, may well have won that race. And again, to reiterate, absolutely Max Verstappen's fault. He should have got the penalty. But I feel like in the closing stage of that race, Lando fell into the same trap that Lewis Hamilton fell into in 2021. I hate to bring up the spectre of 2021, but I think he fell into the same trap of, if this is how Max is going to drive, I am going to fight him on his terms. And it just always ends in tears.
The problem with drivers getting to that point is they pretty much have to do that because the stewards don't properly apply the rules consistently to stop Max from doing what he's doing. Now, I think if you went back and you looked at Senna and Schumacher, I'm going to point out specifically, and you looked at their entire racecraft for their entire careers, both of them, it's virtually identical to Verstappen. I'm going to push the limit and push the limit and push the limit until I get a penalty, but I will push the limit that many times and got the advantage that many times. At the one time I do get a 10-second penalty or whatever it is that I get, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I've already won 2 championships off the back of pushing the limit that many times and not getting a penalty, that I don't care about 10-second penalty. And let's put it this way, those are considered 2 of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport, and they were doing exactly the same thing as Verstappen. Unfortunately, drivers of that caliber will do basically anything it takes to win. It's part of what makes them great, but it's also part of what makes them absolute, like, almost anti-heroes to anyone that's not their fan. Like,
you give them an inch, they take a mile. Yeah,
and that is racing drivers' way, but why on earth are we being so lenient on these rules in Formula One, the pinnacle of motorsport, as it's so often referred to, when if I go watch touring cars and someone is bumping someone through a turn aggressively, they're penalised. Doesn't matter the context, doesn't matter anything. If they break that rule and they egregiously shove another car in any way, like, don't get me wrong, there's an element still of rubbing is racing, so to speak, in British touring cars, but if you in any way essentially knock a car off its line or off its position, you will be penalised. Track limits, they do not take any messing about in touring cars about track limits. They literally have the sensor pads. You trigger those sensor pads, your lap time is deleted or whatever it might be. Like, why are we not taking the severity of the rules to that level at this level in motorsport? What's so different about these drivers in this sport that they are allowed to get away with that when Porsche Super Cup doesn't allow it? The touring cars don't allow it. The V8 supercars don't allow it. WEC doesn't allow it. Like, why are all these other... Bearing in mind, half of these are FIA motorsports as well, for context. They're not all, but a lot of them are. Why are these other series has been so hard on drivers that break the rules and making sure everybody stays in line, whether you're the multiple world champion or the rookie that's never done a race in his life? They're all held to the same standard. Why do we get this bizarre stuff of, oh, well, they didn't make contact, so it's fair. Like, if you left the track, you left the track. If you didn't give someone room, you didn't give someone room. And why is it always got to be so ambiguous? That's what leads to stuff like this.
When Alex Brundle was analysing all of this on F1 TV, he made the point that we've made several times, and he's actually the first person that I remember within the kind of closer F1 circle that's actually said this out loud, which is, it's another case of policing the outcome, not the offence. Like,
100%.
The thing that Verstappen did happened multiple times in this race, let alone over the last few years. But because Norris was, as he was in his rights to do, held his line, and it ended in a collision, then it's penalised. And, like, you shouldn't have to wait for there to be an incident to be penalising people doing the wrong thing. Like, if someone is squeezing someone beyond the edge of the track, you need to be pointing out then you can't do this, not waiting for it to become a crash.
100%.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because, man, what a race. Like, all of this aside, what a like, and there was such a lull in the middle, and then it just went insane.
The even more frustrating bit of it is, and this is from both sides, one in terms of getting a better outcome to the race where it's not as controversial, but two, also frustrating that if it had happened like this, I guarantee he wouldn't have got a penalty. That contact happens, and there's no punctures, and they go back to wheel-to-wheel racing, and then Norris eventually gets the place later around the lap, or there again next lap, similar to what he did in the sprint. Whatever it is that happens, that contact goes unpunished.
Yeah, totally.
And it's all kind of almost forgotten about, and it goes into the vaults, and it ends up being like the time Sainz pushed Verstappen out there, the time Vettel did it to Hamilton, the time Verstappen pushed Leclerc and made a bit of it becomes one of those. It just goes into the ether and it's gone forever. But because it caused punctures and because someone's race ended, it becomes a controversy in these penalties. Why was it not a penalty when someone broke the rules by pushing someone off the track all the other 50 times that it happened?
Yeah. There's one final thing I want to talk about with Norris and Verstappen, and that is immediately after this incident.
Yeah.
Down the next straight, because initially I think Norris's tyre held together a little bit longer than Verstappen's, and Norris was coming at Verstappen, and Verstappen went across the track to block him passing him while he was limping along with 3 tyres. That, for me, is the worst thing Verstappen did in that race. That for that to not even be looked at, I think, is really bad. Like, you can't, especially with a damaged car like that, be blocking another car overtaking you. Like, that's the bit for me that I think Verstappen's, like, really let himself down. Like, it was a really bad look. I mean, they were both just completely hot-headed by that point, I think. I also think obviously Verstappen was able to come back out and finish fifth, I think he was in the end. Norris retired. I also think that in his frustration and anger, Norris probably drove back to the pits much faster than he should have been, and as a result, tore the back of his car to pieces, which is why he had to DNF.
There's two elements of frustration there that's made that whole scenario worse for Norris. One is, not saying he should have to avoid the contact, but in every other scenario that I've mentioned that I've very quickly pulled up in the 3 minutes before this podcast recorded started, because I thought I'd best find at least some specific examples to prove my point. But like in every other example, the driver takes a bit more avoiding action. They both live to fight another day. In scenarios where you see a tyre starting to delaminate, there is no way Norris was driving that slow enough to preserve the car.
Yeah.
The speed he was doing with that tyre delaminating, it was never going to survive getting back. I mean, it's always difficult anyway when you've got a tyre that's deflating on you as you're driving it, but you have to be driving it slower than that. And I'm not saying that, the situation completely changes for that, but they're two examples of maybe Norris not actually being in that position as much as Verstappen, Hamilton, Vettel was. Like, there's an element of bigger picture that is maybe just ever so slightly missing from Norris in those just couple of moments. And like I say, it's not saying that Verstappen's right in what he did, but there's definitely things Norris could have done better in those scenarios that would have mitigated the damage or lessened it, or however you want to put it.
I would hope that Norris in the coming days looks back and sees where he can learn from this, because as much as the incident that put him out of the race wasn't his fault, it was Verstappen's fault, he got penalised for it, there are several things Norris could have done differently to change the outcome. And again, not necessarily that he should or have to be doing those within the way the rules are, but it's like there's an element of self-preservation, there's an element of keeping a cool head that I think he can definitely learn from. And
I guess to wrap it up, the stewards need to be looking at this, and they need to take examples of, I mean, if somebody went through every race over the last 5 years in Austria and that corner, I bet you we could, like, full race highlights, every onboard, so on and so forth. I'll guarantee you can come up with 15, 20 examples of a driver doing what Verstappen did, and it not ending this way because the other driver's taken more evading action than Norris did, but that shouldn't be the case. Every single one of those incidents should have been called out for. You have not given that driver enough room. Every single one of them. Yet the Vettel one on Hamilton when it was an overtaking move was deemed like, this is an amazing move from Vettel at the time. Yeah. But in reality, he's doing exactly the same thing, because he's going into that braking zone and forcing the other person to have to take avoiding action by leaving the track. And therein lies the dangerous precedent that gets set. And someone like Max Verstappen, someone like Ayrton Senna, someone like Michael Schumacher, and so on and so forth, even Vettel to some degree, like younger Vettel, will abuse that leniency in the rules. They will take it to the absolute nth degree that they can to take advantage of it. And it will only ever lead to us being in this crappy situation where we're basically saying, well, the driver that got hit could have done a bit more to avoid it because that horrible precedent has been set. And I don't think I say any more other than that I'm more disappointed by the way the rules are written and the way the rules are applied than I actually am Verstappen. And I know that might probably piss some people off that I'm not like going full in on Verstappen. But at the end of the day, that's where I see it. Like, I'm not saying he's 100% right, but I'm also saying he's not 100% wrong because a horrible standard's been set by the officials.
Totally. I mean, I am disappointed in Verstappen because, like, I was very critical of him early in his career. For much of 2021, I was very critical of him. I've gained a lot of respect for him in the years since then, and those few laps felt like kind of all of the things that annoy people about him that haven't been.
Yeah,
well, then again, he's
true.
not really had to race anyone this hard for a number of years. So now suddenly he having to properly race for wins. It's kind of all come out again, which is a real shame. And I also hope he kind of looks back at, like, to be fair, I did, even in the immediate aftermath versus the interviews later on, I think having seen a replay, he definitely seemed to kind of change his tone a little bit. It's not like he was apologetic or repentant, but he definitely seemed to kind of, I got the impression he was like, oh, actually, seeing it back from outside, I'm not completely innocent here. And I don't know.
There's one thing that he kept referring back to, which was this whole thing of, well, we wouldn't have been in that position if it wasn't for the tyre situation and the slow pit stop and blah, 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 whatever. He needs to just give that bit of rest, because none of that is an excuse for...
No.
Like, doesn't matter why you're in the situation. It's not it's not a defence and it's not an excuse for what happens. And I just hope that at least behind, even if it is only behind closed doors and he never comes and outwardly says anything media-wise, not as long as, I at least hope that he has the decency, after looking at it, to go to Norris and have like a proper conversation with him about it and not issue an apology, give him an apology, and actually sort of say it can easily be like backhanded for me. Like, if they have that conversation and they settle it, at least that's something. Because what I don't want is two drivers who have, generally speaking, had a hell of a lot of respect for each other over the years up to now, suddenly have all that ruined over one incident that occurred because it could have been policed better from 10 laps earlier and previous, incidents at the same spot.
Yeah, like, there's been a lot of armchair psychology after this. I mean, not least of all Sky F1, but I do feel like the fact that this did happen with someone he is friends with, maybe, hurts a bit more than it would from another driver on the grid.
I think you can see that, to be fair, in some of the bits and pieces that he has done to camera and media since the end of the race.
Yeah.
And I think you can sort of see that he's trying to, I guess, defend his side, but without directly blaming Norris and saying it's all Norris. Like, there's 100% some kind of humility there for the fact that someone who he considers a friend and enjoys racing against has had his race ended. Much different to the Hamilton-Verstappen battles where he couldn't care less and he was just giving it it's his fault, he shouldn't have driven into me, blah, blah, blah. Like, you could see that the tone was very different.
Absolutely.
I just hope they sort it out between each other, because I want racing between them like what we did see in the sprint, even though it was only brief and it wasn't for the race. Like, that's what I want to see, is them making moves on each other. And it's so ironic, because I feel like a tempted fate of all of this, because me and Emily were sat watching the sprint and I watched that move from Norris and then Verstappen second check himself on turning in and then having to run at him down into turn 4. And I turned to Emily and I went, that shows the respect that they've got for each other as racing drivers, because Verstappen is giving him the room, but Norris has also given him the space to react to it. And I said, that is good racing between two people who respect each other. Fast forward 24 hours and look where we are.
I think that maybe speaks to how much the drivers care about the sprints. But
well, yeah, I suppose maybe that is it. Maybe he cares. I mean, speaking of drivers not caring about the sprints, have you seen the thing? Just very, very off topic, but sort of on topic. Have you seen the thing with Verstappen whilst he was sim racing? So for those who haven't, just very quickly, Verstappen was doing a sprint race. What was it? Was it Friday night?
A sim race on Friday night.
Sorry, a sim race on Friday night. And they were saying to him, like, don't you have to be up for a race in the morning? He's like, oh, I don't even know. Like, we have to race at something like 12 or something. And then they're like, do you even know when it is? He's like, not really. Let me check. And he goes, oh, it's 11 o'clock. And they're like, oh, right, so you race at 11. He's like, yeah, I guess. Or I can't, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not doing it word for word. I'm not doing it justice.
I believe he used the word, who cares?
Who cares? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that does just show how little the drivers actually care about the sprints. And I know from a fan perspective, yeah, we get more on-track action, but they've clearly got to make it more appealing to the drivers, because one who wants to win everything at all costs doesn't care.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you?
But to your original point, that was one of the few sprint races where I came away more excited about the Grand Prix, not less. And as Discord have just said, that aged like a fine milk, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that was probably in reference to me directly turning to Emily and saying what I said, probably.
Yeah.
And now I look like an idiot.
Right, we've done well over half an hour. Should we talk about the other 18 cars?
Yeah, let's do a run. Do you want to do just a very quick rundown
of them? There's a couple of incidents we can discuss, but obviously the lead was then inherited by Russell for his second win in F1, and Mercedes' first win since Russell's first at Brazil 2022. I mean, obviously he kind of looked into being in first, but at the same time, like in a race where Mercedes and Ferrari were pretty close together, he put himself in the position to take advantage of that. He was far and away the best of those four who were kind of in the chasing pack. So,
well, you say the Ferraris and the Mercedes were quite close together. One of the Ferrari was.
Yeah. But yeah, like a great drive from him. Like, he deserved to be in the position to take advantage for sure. Despite Toto's best efforts to put him off when he was in mid-corner towards the end of the race.
I kind of don't blame George for the reaction.
No. Hamilton, meanwhile, said he called his race pretty shocking. He really nearly got past Sainz at the start and didn't quite make it stick. And then that was basically his afternoon. He was just stuck behind Sainz for the entirety of the race.
Yeah. Took a bit of damage from that turn one, lap one incident,
there were so many drivers were sort of wounded after turn one. But we should point again, like, we've spent a lot of time discussing the negative stuff. Still a fantastic race, and we're now 11 races in. We've had 5 different winners from 4 different teams. I would not have predicted that at the start of the season.
Definitely not. Maybe for the back end of the season, as everyone's catching up, but to be not officially at halfway yet and be in that position, that's not bad at all. That's
turned into a heck of a season.
Yeah.
Ferrari, kind of the 4th fastest car again, but as I said, quite close with Mercedes this time. Another good drive from Sainz, kind of did the most of what he had, I think. Couldn't quite hold off Piastri towards the end. Poor Leclerc, meanwhile, he got stuck in a Perez and Piastri sandwich at the start and picked up quite a big chunk of damage. He had to pit on lap 1 for a new wing. He then did an additional 3 stops. He did a medium, hard, medium strategy.
I didn't even know they had that many tyres available to win the race.
Genuinely, I was like, did he go back and put on a set of mediums he'd already used, like, towards the end? Like, where are these mediums?
I mean, they can't have all been new. I didn't pay enough attention, to be honest, but they can't have all been new. No way.
The team kept telling him he could still get points. And to be fair, with the 2 retirements at the end, he did come very close. He finished 11th, but
there was.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just a weekend to forget.
It really
Leclerc,
was. The interview after the race, they did the usual question of like, disappointing day, but what can you learn from this? And he was just like, absolutely nothing. I put this one behind me. We learned nothing. We moved.
Don't do 4 stops in a race is probably what you can say learn from that one.
Sergio Perez. I mean, he was another one who got some pretty significant damage in that turn 1 incident. I still don't think that's enough to excuse still finishing behind his teammate, despite Max doing almost an entire lap on 3 tyres and an extra pit stop and a 10-second penalty.
He's still some like 17 seconds down on him even still, wasn't
he? I mean, in the sprint he finished about 15 or 16 seconds down, and that was like a 25-lap race. Which brings us nicely onto Haas, because one of them finished ahead of Perez. An amazing weekend for Haas. Their best result of the season. They finished 6th and 8th. Hulkenberg finished ahead of Perez completely on merit. Perez actually, unseen on TV, Perez actually passed him on the final lap, and then Hulkenberg repassed him to hold on to 6th. So 19 points for them this weekend lifts them up to 7th in the constructors. Yeah, really good, really pleased with them. Like a great drive from.
Yeah.
But I mean, both of them, but Hulkenberg in particular. I mean, Hulkenberg was like well up in qualifying again as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he always goes pretty well in qualifying, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's always got that one lap pace in him. Or well, not always, but you know, if you're relying on anyone to cause a bit of an upset and get in that top 10 when they maybe shouldn't be, it's usually Nico Hulkenberg.
Last couple, the team formerly known as Minardi. Ricciardo, he scored points for the second time in 3 races. He undercut both the Alpines to do that. Seems a lot happier in that car at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, they're going to have discussions over the summer break about what his future looks like and what the lineup for that team looks like. But that's a much bigger discussion we can probably save until the summer break.
Yeah.
Gasly picked up another point for Alpine after, again, the Alpine just seemed to fight each other and no one else for the whole race. I mean, I can't remember which one of the two was complaining about the fight they had. It was, from the outside, it seemed fine.
I mean, yeah, there were moments in it. Like, I mean, I referenced one when I was trying to do comparisons for Turn 3, where Ocon basically pushed Gasly off the circuit to either keep position or take position. I can't remember which way around it was.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was a good bit of a fight between them. Like, there was that bit where Gasly kind of went around the outside of 4 to get the inside line in 5. It was decent move, decent fight, generally just a little bit scrappy in places. But yeah, generally all right.
And then finally, Aston Martin, another awful weekend. This track really showing up the weaknesses of that car. That's 3 races out of the last 4 now. They haven't scored any points. Stroll was another turn 1 damage recipient and gained a couple of places. Alonso also picked up a 10-second penalty for that collision with Zhou, which was just awful. Just absolutely awful.
It's not what you usually see from him, is it? It's very uncharacteristically clumsy for Alonso.
It was the lunge of a driver who's kind of lost a lot of faith and isn't having a great time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got the fastest lap, though.
He did just steal fastest lap and got no points for it out of spite, I think.
I mean, funny all the same. It's like, if anything that anyone can do to slow Verstappen down in this title fight,
yeah,
there it is.
The hero we need.
Yeah.
Worth pointing out that Alonso also picked up 2 penalty points for that, which actually puts him on 8 penalty points now, none of which expire until March. So he's creeping closer to that 12-point race ban as well.
Yeah.
Should we do some awards? Should we do driver of the day?
Yeah. Difficult. Do you know what, actually? Because of what we've already said about him, I'm going to say Nico Hulkenberg.
I like Nico Hulkenberg. I think Piastri would also be a good shout.
Piastri.
Obviously,
well, I mean, Piastri's definitely getting move of the day for one of 2.
He's guaranteed an award.
So he's getting that regardless.
But yeah, Piastri had that unfortunate lap time deletion in qualifying, which dropped him from the front row back to 7th. He started.
Yeah, should have been 3rd if he'd not had it deleted, right?
Yeah, so climbing back to 2nd, he was less than 2 seconds off Russell by the end.
Yeah.
I mean, man, if Piastri had qualified where he should have done, I mean, that should have been his first win. Then again, if Piastri had been in the mix, I guess they could have been a very different race. Anyway, I like Hulkenberg, though. I can happily give that to Hulkenberg. I think he absolutely maximised that race. Definitely. I mean, move of the day, I've already said, it's definitely Piastri. It's just which one we choose.
Yeah, so he did it first around Perez, which it's officially turn 5, isn't it? So it's like the left-hander as you come into the infield, basically. That was the first time he did it around the outside of Perez.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the difference between that one and the time that he did it on Sainz for 2nd, to work out if one was better than the other. I would maybe say the one on Sainz was probably the better one because Sainz will have put up way more of a fight and been more of a challenge to do it on. So
they were side by side for much longer on the Sainz one as well. So
yeah, and allegedly, well, I mean, not allegedly, I've seen it, but Perez had like a hole the size of my head in his car.
Yeah, you could climb through his side pod.
Yeah. So yeah, I can go with the one when he did it around Sainz specifically.
Yep.
Then last one.
Honestly, what the f*** are we doing here?
Well,
we've had a couple of inbox nominations for this week,
Go for it,
which is always nice. Robbie Fletcher pointed out, I completely missed this on the broadcast, but after the race when the drivers were being interviewed, he sent us a screenshot of Russell being interviewed and the screen behind him said, next race Great Britain, with a French flag behind it.
Oui, oui. Bonjour.
So
That's
yeah,
it.
great work there, Farm. We also had Kilowog, who suggested just the race coverage in general. He said like multiple drivers took race-altering lap 1 damage and it was never shown or discussed, which is a very good point.
Yeah.
There was a lot of just missing stuff going on.
Yeah.
The other two are both sprint ones, actually. There was the sprint start being aborted because some photographers had just wandered into the wrong place at turn 1. So they had to abort the start, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Also, the timing tower just disappearing for most of the sprint and then just reappearing on the final lap. My favourite bit, actually, was we had no on-screen graphics for pretty much the entire sprint. And then they finally got one back and it was showing us the gap between, like, Stroll and Ocon for 12th and 13th. It's like, great, really, really important information you found for us there. Leclerc and Sargent having no tyres according to the timing tower, says Paul, another good one.
I don't know where to go. I'm glad that we're not entertaining the whole thing from the beginning for this.
We've done enough of that.
This needs to be too light-hearted. This needs to be more light-hearted and less serious than that. So
yeah.
I'm going to go with a French flag for the British
good,
race.
isn't it?
Yeah,
it is
even though I
very
didn't
funny
see it, I like how hard it is. It's not like it's in the spur of the moment where you've got to think about it. Because bearing in mind it's next race Great Britain, like it's not like when you occasionally get the flag slightly wrong for a driver or something like that because they're having to put that graphics package together like on the fly pretty quick and they misclicked. That's a predetermined graphic. Have you found it? You look like you're looking for it and you found it.
To be fair, I think what it actually is it's a Union Jack that's just been like terribly cropped and pushed into the corner. And that's why it looks like a French flag. Because there's not even a French Grand Prix, so why would it even be in the graphics package?
Yeah.
I think that's just a terrible choice of cropping the Union Jack. But either way, it's very stupid.
Well, let's just go for the race coverage in general then.
Race coverage in general. There we go. No graphics.
Definitely.
All the things. Right. Do you want to take us through predictions?
Yes, I think I shall. I mean, given events, predictions probably didn't go how most people were hoping. Not many people scored many points at all. The highest scorers were all 2s, and there was a lot of you. So, unfortunately, I don't have the time to run through every single name, but there's quite a few. Head to backofgood.com if you want to find out if you're one of them. In terms of just notable bits, I guess, to mention, Lockman 4000, which I hope that's your actual name, because that's an awesome name. If so, I doubt it, but I hope it is. Lockman 4000 was the only person, to get Norris as the first DNF, so the only person scoring points there. Literally nobody had Russell as a winner, unsurprisingly. And Amazon Web Services, the absolutely classic satire submissions, scored half a point because they were the only person pretty much... In fact, no, they were literally the only person who had Leclerc being outside the top 10. So everybody else was well inside the top 10 for Leclerc, which, to be fair, by the form of science, he should have been. Where most people were putting him 4th, 5th, is realistically where he probably should have been. But yeah, Amazon Web Services got half a point because even that satire wasn't close enough to what he actually did. So half a point there. In terms of the F1 Fantasy League, Lurch F1 was this week's winner with 313 points. The only person to break 300 as well. So well done to Lurch. Ricky Bobby Racing does still lead the way, though, as always, with 2,606 points. And then a quick stop over to Grid Rival. Mighty Hawk 44 just compounded their lead at the top of the table, moving to 10,738 altogether after winning this week with 1,055 points. So people need to, I guess, have some really good weekends if they're going to catch Mighty Hawk there, and Ricky Bobby for that matter. I know we're only halfway through, but the fantasy leagues are looking like a Verstappen championship in each of them. Right, on that note, head to backthegrid.com if you want to see any of that and get involved with it. Quick mention to it before we get into the next bit, but yeah, go.
Breaking news from WTF Corner.
Oh,
Discord have just noticed that as well as the French flag, they also spell Britain wrong. So I'm changing this week's WTF back to that one because that's just ludicrous.
Well, how did they spell it, out of interest? I'm intrigued.
Britian. Britian.
Wow. The Britian.
Yeah. Great Britian. Right. Speaking of Britian, should we do some predictions for Silverstone?
Yeah, let's do some predictions for the Britian Grand Prix. Oh, in fact, do you want to do storylines first? Did you say storylines or did you say predictions?
I didn't say storylines, I said predictions. We can do a quick couple of storylines, I guess.
You do some storylines to help me make a decision on my predictions. How's that sound?
Alrighty.
Put you under pressure because you've not written any. I know you haven't.
We've not written any. I mean, the obvious one is whether McLaren can sustain this fight with Red Bull. My suspicion is that they will. I feel like Silverstone is going to suit the things that the McLaren is good at.
Yeah.
I mean, the Red Bull has been pretty dominant at that track for a good number of years. Like, going back to the Vettel days, the Red Bull always went well at Silverstone. And they spend a lot of time there. They do most of their testing at Silverstone, so they know it well. But yeah, I think it's going to be very close again between them and McLaren.
Yeah, McLaren are very clearly like legitimate contenders for this, aren't they now? Legitimate contenders for the wins and the podiums. Mercedes and Ferrari still aren't that far behind. So I think without a rear gunner, Verstappen struggles like what he did this weekend because there's no one to give him a buffer back to the next car. So I think, yeah, it's kind of inevitable that the McLarens are going to be in the mix there. From my side, I think another storyline will probably be how much of this weekend is going to spill over into Silverstone.
Absolutely.
How frosty is the relationship between Verstappen and Norris going to be? And is it going to start boiling over on track again? Or will they have had a nice quiet word between themselves, away from cameras, just the two of them, and things are relatively back to normal? I mean, I think the way that Norris goes racing with Verstappen will now be changed, at least for the near future, because I think you kind of saw that in some of the moves he was making in the race. You saw that he'd changed his philosophy, I guess, on the way he attacks him. Whether it'll be a permanent thing or not, I don't know. But yeah, my storyline is probably will what's happened this weekend kind of boil over into Silverstone and kind of see almost a repeat. Not a repeat, hopefully, but like that tension on circuit, basically, between the two of them. Yeah.
And I think as a final thing, just keep an eye on where we're at with the constructor standings as we rapidly get towards the summer break, because McLaren are now 23 points behind Ferrari, and both of them are within touching distance of Red Bull. So all three of those very close at the top. Yeah. And obviously we've now had Haas score some big points and jump forward, but the bottom 4 or 5 teams, that's all pretty open as well. I mean, I say that Sauber are still on absolutely nothing, but you never know. Williams have only got 2, so even that could change.
Yeah, true.
Also, because it's Britain, we should talk about weather. As things currently stand, it looks like it's going to be dry, but I mean, this
given
far
by
out,
what the weather's
nothing.
been like in this country in the last 3 or
who
4
knows?
weeks, who
Probably
knows
snowed
about
off.
that, if I'm honest. Yeah, it probably snowed off.
Right, predictions. We've padded for long enough.
Yeah, let me run through these. So, fastest in Q3, any takers, Chris? I can tell you mine if you want, if you've not thought about it yet. I'm going Norris. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm going double Norris. I went with it last week for Austria. We obviously came very close and perhaps should have seen a win. I think that the pace in that car is legit and the pace in Norris is legit. And I think that there's only so long Verstappen can keep his dodgy defences to keep him back. So, yeah, I think a double Norris for me.
That just reminded me, actually, of a stat I meant to bring up. Qualifying in Austria over the weekend, I believe it was just over 7/10 covered the entire field, which makes it the closest qualifying session ever. Which is...
What did I say?
You did. You very
what
much
did I
alluded to
say?
that last
Well,
week.
I mean, I said the top 10, maybe the top 15 will be within half a second. They can't have been that far off if the whole field
not
was
far off
7/10. Yes.
Top 10 was just over 2/10 in Q1.
What? That's mad.
Yeah.
I can't believe I predicted that thing and then didn't pay attention to the outcome of it.
Fast in Q3. I feel like qualifying could be any one of Verstappen, Norris and Piastri at basically every race at the moment. Because Piastri's right in the mix.
Yeah, true.
I'm going to say Verstappen for fastest in Q3, but I'm
What
going
about the
to
win?
agree with the Norris win.
Ooh.
I think he's going to do it. And Silverstone will go wild.
Yeah, it will.
Lewis who? King Norris.
Yeah. First DNF. I need to go check the website on who I put because I've already filled this in on the website.
Oh my goodness.
And I've genuinely forgot because I don't know who to pick. So I just kind of looked at the list and went, that one? So whilst you have a think, I'm going to go find what I've actually entered, if that's all right with you.
I'm going to go for... Go on, who did you say?
Nico Hülkenberg.
Ooh, 0 to 0.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't even the reason I did it. It was just more, I was really struggling. So I was just like, I feel like it's going to be a mechanical failure. Silverstone does one of two things in races. You either have like a massive turd one shunt, like the one that took like Russell and Zhou and everyone like that out the other year, or you have like everyone's doing all right and you get the odd mechanical failure. So I'm just going the Hulkenberg on mechanical basis.
I'm going to go for the other Haas, then I'm going to say Magnussen.
Okay. That's fair. Do you care to stretch as far as to say whether or not it'll be a mechanical failure or something of his own doing?
I think it'll be a silly early... It's a lap one silliness, I think.
Okay. Well, I'm going 19 finishes. I'm just going like Hulk's engine goes pop or
and nothing
something,
else.
And that's it. Anything for you? Number of finishes?
I'll go 17.
17, all right. And then we've already drawn Random Driver this week to be able to open the predictions. So if you have been on the website, you've possibly seen it already at this point. I mean, you could have technically already seen it when you hear this recording. That was mainly a message for the Discord, I think, than anyone else. The people can hear what I'm saying right now as it's happening. Anyway, it's Russell. So Russell, man of the moment. I think that legitimately in Silverstone, with everybody else kind of finishing where they should be, I'm going a podium. I'm going a double Brit podium.
Wow.
Here. So I'm going to go for Norris in the win, Verstappen in second, and Russell in third. I'm going to say that he can use that home advantage to edge his way past Piastri, maybe.
I think he'll struggle to beat Piastri. It all depends on where the Ferraris are this weekend.
Yeah.
Like, they were so close. I'll be optimistic and say fourth.
Okay. I think Kilowog, who usually agrees with me, is actually agreeing with you this time. So, whatever, Kilowog. Right, that is it for our predictions. If you want to make yours, head to backofthegrid.com. Sign up if you haven't already. It's always worth doing because there is a prize if you get full 5 out of 5 correct, which is actually somewhat becoming a bit more of an elusive challenge now. We thought
really
we thought this would be the year of the prize where everyone was getting one every week, but
and it's become extremely difficult.
It's become a bit more difficult, which is beneficial to us, so to speak. Right, anyway, I want to move us on to inbox to round us off.
Keep me saying now. Stay out. Box. Hey, man.
First up from Imposter Nikki, who says, "Cheerio, fellows." Cheerlo, fellow. Is this another? They keep us on their toes with these. The question is, with how good Oscar is performing in just his second year, how different would McLaren be versus Alpine if he had signed differently?
Oof.
The idea of Piastri languishing at Alpine makes me sad.
Yeah. I don't even want to think about it because it would probably be pretty bad. I don't think you'd be questioning his talent, but you'd definitely be feeling sorry for him, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's another driver I could see in the same way. I don't know. I can't think of another good example of someone who was a clearly good driver stuck driving for a bit of a pants team in recent years.
Van Dorn.
Yeah, Van Dorn when he was in the McLaren.
He might have stoffled it, unfortunately.
Yeah, could well be.
And then I wonder who McLaren would have signed if they couldn't have got Piastri. I mean,
Stoffel Van Dorn.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been fine with that. Yeah, I think it would have been terrible for Piastri's career. I think McLaren obviously would have depended on who else they got, but
yeah,
thinking back to what the driver market was like then, I think they got the best available driver at that time. So I think it would have been a negative all round, to be honest.
Because of Piastri being a rookie and how little I'm going to assume he's actually contributed to the McLaren getting to where it is. I'm not saying he hasn't at all, but it will definitely come more from Norris than Piastri. That's just the way these things are. I don't think it would have necessarily differed the teams in any capacity, because it's not like which of them signed Hamilton or which of them signed Verstappen. Like a driver that can go there and tell you exactly what he wants and you do it and he goes and wins a race because of it. That's not the kind of driver that they were trying to sign in Piastri. I think it's more affected Piastri's career than it has either of the team's performances, if that makes sense. So, I don't think there'd be much difference in where McLaren are to where Alpine are had he gone the other way. It just means that maybe McLaren wouldn't have two drivers that are pushing for wins. They'd only have one, I guess. That'd be it, really. Next one, Holly Woodward. I've kind of paraphrased this one a little bit just because the way Holly worded this in the email, but the general gist was, looking forward to hearing your reactions on Norris versus Verstappen, but for me, Andreas Stella summed it up perfectly. What do you think about his comments on the matter?
I like Andreas Stella a lot, and I think his assessment was spot on, basically. The gist of it was, he basically said, he sort of said, most people know who's responsible for that, but the problem is if you don't address these things honestly, it will come back. They've come back today because they were not addressed properly in the past, when there were some fights with Lewis that needed to be punished in a harsher way. Like this, you learn how to race in a certain way, which is fair and square. The regulations must be enforced in a way that is effective, because when a car is out of a race as a consequence of these accidents, the punish needs to be proportionate to the outcome. Which is pretty much what we were saying. This has come about as a result of poor policing of these kind of things in the past. Yeah, I hope my earlier rant explains to Holly how I feel about Andreas Stella's comments, because they're not that far removed, I guess. Yeah.
Do you want to read the next one?
Yes, if I go back to the correct tab, I will. Kilowog says, "Aloha, brother. Why do rules about moving under braking and in reaction to moves or returning positions gained off track not apply to Max Verstappen?" Oh, boy. I mean, they do and don't apply to anyone and everyone seemingly at random sometimes.
Yeah. I think we've reached a point where we need two things. Essentially, a permanent team of 20 stewards. Yeah, I'm saying that, 20 stewards.
Wow.
Basically, one steward per driver. And that steward's job is essentially to watch that driver through the entirety of the race and nothing else. And any track infringement, any movement against the driver in a braking zone or whatever it might be, any kind of infringement, their job is report it. That's it. Simple. Same 20 stewards. You can mix up which driver that they're with so they don't start getting like a bias, like, to or from the driver. Happy with that. The same 20 people monitoring the same 20 drivers, that are on the track, essentially, week in, week out, find some kind of consistency in that. And actually penalise people properly for things like the incidents where I was referring to before, where people have clearly done what Verstappen did to Norris this weekend in the past, but because there was no contact, because there was no incident, it's just been left to go unpunished. Start throwing out warnings for that. Like, actively monitor these drivers and start throwing out warnings for them. And if it means having to throw up a replay because a driver's doing something they shouldn't be doing, and you've got to kind of show it to justify it for TV coverage, feel free. Fair enough, you'd say that detracts away from the racing. Show it in the little box. We've got the little box, the picture-in-picture box back. Show it in there. I mean, it doesn't need to be massive, unless, if it's for a big move or for the win, show it in full broadcast replay, by all means, but do something more significant about the fact that there's an inconsistency. Get permanent stewards. How many times have them words been uttered on this podcast? How many times? Get permanent stewards so that there's consistency. And if it needs it, put a steward per driver on watching everything that they're doing and making sure that they're not breaking rules and pushing people wide when they shouldn't be, and actually warn them for it. Give them black and white flags.
I will
Simple.
say, as a bit of a slight tangent, because the last race we had at this track was just track limit violations left, right, and centre. And this year, on most of the corners, they put in strips of gravel just behind the curbs. Yeah. And
look what happened.
It kind of self-policed itself.
Yeah.
Except for
Lando
the
Norris.
one corner they didn't have that. Well, hell broke loose. But to be fair to them, they did come up with what I think was a pretty elegant solution for the problem they had last time. And also I think it's something they can very easily swap in and out for when they have motorbikes racing there, for example, because the last thing you want is random strips of gravel when you're on a MotoGP bike. But yeah, on that side of things, I think they did a very good job there.
Yeah. I'm going to read, or attempt to read, a wall of text from Blaze. I've not seen this in advance, so I apologise. I apologise, because it is literally a solid paragraph, so bear with me, listeners. Hola, amigos. With Max being the only dominant part of the Red Bull team, why is no one talking about the design philosophy and picking a driver that matches Max? Checo clearly doesn't naturally get on with the car, and the only reason the start of the year goes well is an educated guess that an incredible amount of sim time has been put in from him. Why don't they just pick a driver who is known to like a similar car? Daniel Ricciardo is long in the tooth and with 6 years of bad taste in the mouth, but he liked the Adrian Newey cars, and Red Bull needs more points from the number 2 car. The V-Carb is clearly a separate car and a philosophy, with Gasly and Alex's careers showing that they're not always a stepping stone to the big team. With a different philosophy, success at one does not always guarantee results at the other. This is why I don't scream for Lawson to enter the Red Bull. I'd hate for him to share the same fate as De Vries. Is the media missing an angle to the driver selection? I think I managed that okay.
You did, and it is a very good point. I think the entire idea of V-Carb, Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, whatever, being a junior team / stepping stone team has kind of fallen by the way. So, by their own admission, they're not really treating it as that as such anymore. like I always come back to the interview that Alex Albon gave, where he said like he thought he liked a car that was really on the nose and pointy until he drove the Red Bull setup how Max likes it. So, but I mean, but Blaze is right. Like if you look at all of Verstappen's teammates over the years, it is Ricciardo who seemed to get the most out of that car. Out of that kind of car. But I guess the other side of this is: do Red Bull care? Do they want someone who's going to be close to Max?
Probably not.
I'm not sure they do. Like,
I think that's the irony. Is we talk about they need someone who can be a rear gunner for Max or whatever, but in reality, they just let him keep doing what he's doing until an event like this plays out, and then it's start again from square one, rinse and repeat.
Yeah, like they don't need the prize money.
No.
If they can keep winning drivers' championships and finish second or third in the constructors and get some more wind tunnel and CFD time, I think that's probably fine for them, honestly. I really don't think they care as much as...
I mean, that is a fair point. Like, if they don't win that constructors, there's technically a benefit to them that they've won a world drivers title and they've got more aero time than the team that's won the constructors, right?
It's gonna become a problem, as Wes has just sort of pointed out in the chat. Like with other teams being more competitive up front, it's going to become a problem if Verstappen is having to fight 2, 3, 4 competitors on his own.
Yeah,
and then he hasn't got a wingman to kind of help things out. But right now, I honestly don't think Red Bull care that much. I think they're fine. They're still leading both championships.
That's the unfortunate bit, isn't it? They don't care enough to make a change, which is why he's still got a seat in the ultimate grand scheme of things. Yeah. Right, that is it for this week. It's gone a bit longer than it normally would, but I'm sure you can all understand why. Could have really done without this one being a double header, I guess, but it is what it is. We barely talked about Silverstone, to be brutally honest with you, so at least next week you get to hear us talk about the recap of Silverstone. If you're heading there, enjoy yourselves. If you're not, enjoy watching it. If you want to stay in touch with us between now and the next episode, we're on the social medias. You can find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, just searching for Back of the Grid. You can also head to backofthegrid.com, where there's information about joining the Fantasy League, a good old contact form if you don't want to use the social media inputs and the like. And then if you want to find out about being part of the Discord community that we mention frequently throughout every episode, head to patreon.com/Back of the Grid, where there's information about signing up to that, which then gets you access to the Discord, so you can be chatting with us through the week, whether it's about F1 or not. Listen to the show live, and a nice fun community where you can have your opinion about the Max Verstappen and Lando Norris situation without fear of being heckled, abused, or shouted at by someone from the opposite side. So if there's ever a pro to join in our Discord, that is surely one of them. But I will leave it with that. Enjoy whatever this time brings between now and Silverstone. See you all next week. Goodbye, everyone.